Well, let's go ahead and get started while everyone's trickling in. Love to see all the links. Hopefully, you're finding some new people to connect with. I'm Jack Cochran, General Manager of Presales Collective, and welcome to the Partner Forum series. This is a series where we bring in leaders and founders at our partner organizations, people who sponsor and help Presales Collective to actually be a community that can run, to give them kind of a voice on different topics that we know are important to the community. So today's topic, it's a little bit of a mouthful, which I think that's my own fault for setting the title of this. We're all about measuring pre-sales impact on revenue, strategies for quantifying and communicating the true value of pre-sales beyond just activity metrics, which I know at some point everyone here has probably been tracked by the number of demos that they gave, and everyone always wished that it was a little bit better than that. But joining me today, I've got two of our partners. I have Neil Parek, the revenue lead at Sifthub, and Ben Hills, the CEO at Iris, which you can find at Sifthub, because I believe sifthub.com. Is that correct, Neil, or is it Sifthub something else? I don't know the wrong URL.
Sifthub.io.
Sifthub.io. Thank you. I'm in my mind. I'm like, I don't think it's right to say .com. Sifthub.io, and you can find Iris at heyiris.ai. Correct? Did I get that one right, Ben? Excellent. Perfect. Well, I'm going to give each of you just a brief, like a couple minutes to introduce yourselves, give a little bit about your background before we hop into the webinar. Neil, let's start with you.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Jack. Really excited to be here and looking forward to this. I lead revenue at Sifthub, their global expansion operations. I'll just quickly talk about how Sifthub came into being, and our founder Manisha. He used to or co-founded Loginex, which was a route optimization SaaS platform in the past. And I think there she found an opportunity of a huge context arbitrage. When you're advising, you don't have any context of what is happening, what deals are ongoing. How do you best advise folks when you don't have context? And I think that's how Sifthub came into being, in terms of giving newer A's or any folks who are new to a company, essentially giving them that context that your top reps, top SEs, etc., by collating it. So that's a bit about how Sifthub came into being at a high level. But yeah, excited to be here.
Thank you, Neil. Ben, over to you as well.
Hi, thanks, Jack and Courtney, for having me. I'm Ben Hills, founder and CEO of Iris. I started this company after being chief operating officer of an ed tech company for 10 years, where I scaled that company from 0 to about 100 million students on our platform, brought our software to about 1,000 colleges and universities, and was the entire pre-sales function. I was the SME doing all of the demos, proposals, RFPs, leading our customer success team. And so I started this company with a mission of how we can make everyone an expert in their own company. We launched our product about a year ago, and now I've worked with over 100 teams on using Iris to democratize knowledge, increase the win rate on key work like RFPs and security questionnaires, and ultimately bring a lot more high value, fun, and engagement to the pre-sales world. So super excited to be here and share more and get to know the community better.
Excellent. Thank you, Ben. Thank you both. Let's hop right in. Let's talk about our topic of kind of measuring pre-sales and kind of the problems with that. I guess the first question that I have, let's just acknowledge the problem a little bit, because there is definitely a problem with measuring pre-sales. And from your perspective, why is that so difficult? Ben, I'll actually start with you. Why is measuring pre-sales teams historically been so difficult?
Yeah, I think the crux of what makes it really difficult is that pre-sales teams are inherently very cross-functional and interdisciplinary. So when I was a COO, my engineering team could be measured based on output and features shipped. My quota-bearing reps could be measured based on how many dollars they brought in. But it's really hard to measure the roles that are the glue between the teams. Pre-sales, product marketing, the functions that exist, as I like to say, in the friction between the gears of a company. And so one of the struggles that almost all CROs and CEOs have is, how do you measure the impact of a team that everyone agrees is incredibly indispensable, but isn't directly tied to a core KPI? And I think, for pre-sales leaders, you're constantly, what we hear is talking to folks who know that team is super valuable. They're driving revenue. They're pushing a team forward. They're making all of this work happen. But because they're not tied directly to one singular metric, it's very hard to measure a thumbs up, thumbs down. Are they doing their job well?
Yeah, I definitely hear you, and that's a lot of what I've seen as well. How you can't measure something when it's not as you don't have as much direct control, right, over that. And so how do you actually measure that? Neil, would love to hear your take on sort of the why
Yeah.
pre-sale teams are so difficult to measure.
Yeah. So yeah, I was saying I largely agree with Ben. And I think the other issue is in measuring this is there's so many activities from pre-sales folks that go into ARR or closing revenue, which is more a lagging indicator. Obviously how many demos, for example, they're taking, the POCs that they run, etc. And all of this, despite so many sophisticated CRM systems now, I'm seeing it's still not easy to track. How do you measure all these activities that go into revenue and essentially try and measure how well pre-sales teams are functioning?
Mm-hmm. That's historically been what we've done through just measuring activity, right? I think that's the first thing that I've seen with everyone. In fact, I'd love to do a little bit of an informal poll here in the chat. If you don't, everyone doesn't mind, put a 1 in the chat if you today are measured just by the activity that you do. I'd love to see put then a 2 in there if you've got more sophisticated measures, and a 3 if you're like, I don't think I'm being measured at all. Would love to see that. A 1 if you feel like it's just activity metrics, a 2 if there's more sophistication, and 3 if you're like, you know what, I don't think we get measured at all. Actually, some 2s. I'm actually surprised that we're definitely seeing some 3s with a frowny face. A 1.5
Yeah.
works. But yeah, more 2s than I expected. So we got some people here who definitely have, you know, or sorry, what did I say? One was activity 2. I kind of did that in a weird order. That's okay. We are a mix across the board for sure, and actually a lot more 3s than I thought. A lot of people here who aren't even being measured at all. So I guess maybe let's start there. For the 3s there that we had that are in here listening, if nothing is being done today, what might be a good place to start? Neil, I feel like you were kind of hinting towards that. If someone's like, you know what, we're not measuring the teams at all, how do you get started even doing that? What's the first step?
Yeah, I think the first step is putting the right systems in place. How are we measuring not just activity metrics that SEs focus on, things obviously like how many demos they're working on, how many opportunities they're working on, but have more sophisticated systems in place to actually measure what is moving the needle. Things like top of my head, I can think of a couple of examples, right? How many qualified demos are SEs taking that are actually converting to wins, right? Or what is the revenue per POC? So focus on more, I would say, value-based metrics that actually give you an idea of what is converting to revenue and how your SEs are spending their time best, rather than simple activity metrics.
It's a little bit based upon measure based upon what you actually want to prove, right? It's a little bit of and that's, I think, going against a little bit of the idea of just measure how many demos someone has done, right? Which I think we saw a lot of the ones which are just tracking the time spent in meetings, etc. Ben, love to get your kind of thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, one, as a founder, I subscribe to the notion that you can't improve what you can't measure. And I think it's important to figure out how to measure impact and success, not just because you want to prove ROI and make sure you're spending in the right ways, but because it's also what actually empowers the individual. I think this gets lost a lot in the measurement conversation, is it's frequently like, how do I prove that you're worth the salary and I should keep hiring you and I don't need to cut my team? But it's actually like, how do I actually give every individual SC the right KPIs so that they're motivated, they know how to get better, and they're actually encouraged and excited to work in the right way? The starting point that I look at with teams is pipeline coverage. If I have an SC, are they able to impact 100% of the deal cycles and opportunities an AE is working on, or only 5 or 10%? And often my goal is not to increase the number of demos or increase throughput, but rather say, hey, my SE's job is to be the all-encompassing subject matter expert. I know that my sales team will be more effective at closing business, the more SME involvement they have. So how do I actually see the coverage of pipeline that my SEs have across my whole AE team? It's more like multi-touch marketing and attribution, where you're saying like, hey, where's my marketing spend attributing across a funnel, rather than like, how many dollars is my marketing spend generating? Where to me, the most important is, are my SEs able to impact as close to 100% of the deals moving through my pipeline as possible?
That's an interesting analogy. As someone who came from the marketing world, the whole kind of there's actually a stigma in the
Yeah,
marketing community about attribution because it's been done wrong for so many years. A lot of times it would be considered last touch. So the last thing that happened was what you would attribute all of the that was the thing that caused someone to convert, when in reality there was many, many things. I feel like we've often done similar things with pre-sales, which is we just look at, okay, the amount of time or the number of meetings that someone has had, or maybe the amount of time that they have spent. Well, that's clearly what drove the deal forward, when there are so many different pieces that go into it, right?
absolutely. And I think, if you take a metric like how many demos is the SE on, well, now the SE's goal is to be in as many demos as possible. But there's nothing that actually says that being in as many demos as possible leads your sales reps to closing more business. Maybe your goal is actually to teach the sales rep how to fish and handle more demos on their own. But all of a sudden, telling the SE that scares them and is like, wait a minute, if my goal is to train the AE on how to run more discovery and run more demos, and now I'm not involved and I'm not hitting my metrics. So it also definitely depends on where you're at as a company, what stage of growth you're in, what stage of hiring you're in, the complexity of the product you're selling. We use OKRs in all the companies that I've led, where sometimes the objective is to certify 100% of the account executive team and running their own demos for a certain segment or a certain product line. And that's not SE involvement directly in being in the demo room, but rather SE influence in training and certifying all the AEs. So there's a time and a place for different metrics. I think for all the threes out there, I would encourage you to go to your managers and your boss and say, I want a number that I can improve on, because that's what's going to help me get better, invest in professional development, be motivated every day to do my job.
Absolutely. Neil, would love kind of your thoughts as well. We're thinking a little bit about how we kind of get started, which you said before, and we're thinking about kind of correlated activities. I guess a question that I have for you around that is, if we're looking at the fact that our pre-sales teams, as we all know, we do more to contribute to the overall success of the sales teams beyond a single opportunity, should that mean we should build even potentially compensation for teams beyond the deal close? Have you seen anything like that work with any companies, or has anyone you know explored that?
Yeah, no, great question. I think to Ben's, just going to go back to Ben's previous point as well. I think pipeline coverage is a great metric. How many deals are my SEs able to go on and influence? I think that's a really good metric. Just double clicking on that. In terms of comp structure and variable, what I've seen, a lot of SE leaders I've been speaking to is not just, let's say, how many deals as an individual an SE is able to impact, but you want to try and have some broad level goals, because obviously SEs, I mean, it depends, are not always tied to revenue or are not always in quota closing goals. How do you incentivize them to essentially then, sorry, am I clear? Can you folks
Okay.
hear me? Okay,
Okay, we
perfect.
can.
Sorry, I'm just having poof. Okay, perfect. So the lot of SE leaders I've been speaking to, essentially, do you want to tie it to a pod or a territory level target, or at least a percentage of their variable component, not only to what deals they're individually closing, but to a pod or a territory level target, like I said. And a couple of other things I'm looking at is not directly tied to revenue, but smaller wins, right? How many deals are you being able to move through the stages, right? How many deals am I able to get through more bottom of the funnel? Am I able to, or is an SE, or is the deal that this SE working on being, how quickly is it being moved from, let's say, a POC to maybe a deep dive negotiation or a discovery to a proof of concept, so on and so forth.
Mhm. Would this be for teams that have, are you referring to those as like, say, separate measures from your typical CRM stages, or would that be tracked based upon those CRM stages?
Yeah, good. I've seen so far tracked on CRM stages. Obviously, every a lot of folks, although there's a broad hierarchy of how these stages flow, a lot of folks have some custom stages that they like to incentivize or comp SEs on. So it's tied to CRM stages.
Yeah, excellent. Ben, would love to hear kind of your thoughts on this kind of act tying to things potentially other than revenue or stage moving from a compensation perspective.
Yeah. I mean, look, there was a time, my last company, where other people at the company were helping with pre-sales. They weren't comped directly on revenue, but on just specific goals and objectives and projects. For instance, we had an objective to convert a higher percentage of free trials to paid and actually have less involvement by our SEs and our sales reps. And we gave our SEs the challenge and said, if we hit certain metrics, you're all going to get a bonus this quarter. There are other times where we're selling products that every single product required a custom demo environment. And this was like pre the reprise era where you could just really quickly spin up a custom demo. And so in that scenario, it was much more related to activity and revenue and all of that. I think, SDRs are another kind of good corollary. Some teams comp SDRs on every meeting booked. Other teams don't comp the SDRs until the deal's closed. I think different things work for different companies depending on volume of pipeline, length of deal cycle, win rate. Like it's just a little different for every team. I think generally speaking, SEs tend to be SEs because they want to be close to the customer, but not responsible for a quota. And so I actually think it's more advantageous from a leadership standpoint to not tie the variable comp directly to deals closed, but rather to other OKRs and projects that the SE is responsible for as a company. Salesforce, for instance, their SE team, at least was about 10 years ago. I genuinely don't know how they do it today. But back then, their entire SE team split one pool of bonus money if the whole sales team hit their number, right? So there was a pot of bonus money and everyone split it equally if the whole sales team hit their number. I think that's a really neat way to do it. You want collaborative competition with an SE team. You want people to work together to help everyone win deals, but just enough competition to want to be the best. And I think generally not tying comp directly to deals won, but rather either overall company objectives or revenue is a better way to incentivize SE teams.
That's definitely an interesting thought. I also want to mention this before we go on, Neil. I can tell you got something you want to comment to that. I'll let you do that in a second. I'm seeing a lot of questions come through in the chat, which is great. I'm not able to read through them all myself, but if you have a question you want us to specifically address, we will have a Q&A at the end. There's a separate box down at the bottom where you can click Q&A. You can enter their questions there. We'll see them. We may address them as we're going along or at the Q&A at the end, just because that way I want to make sure we're addressing any specific questions that people have. But Neil, go ahead. I know you wanted to kind of comment in on that as well.
Yeah, no, just to Ben's point as well, I've seen a lot of SEs, apart from a bonus pool, have a sort of spiff. When an SE does, let's say, a tedious task, whether let's say a custom demo or a long lengthy RFP, just small incentives, but that's something I've seen. And on Salesforce, I think it's, I was just reading recently that Agentforce has now moved to a model where all their SEs are quota facing. So it's interesting. Sorry, you guys can hear me, yes?
Yes.
Okay, just says my internet connection's unstable, but my apologies. Cool. So I think Agentforce, and I was reading recently, and I spoke to a few folks at Agentforce as well. All of their SEs are being moved to quota-facing roles. So just an interesting development. I know Ben was saying 10 years ago, Salesforce were on a model where they have a bonus pool, but it's just interesting to see how that's changing now.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of shifts and adjustments even to AE comp models as well, focusing less on the revenue and more on the actual utilization, the success of customers, getting more tied into that. I think we've actually had lots of other webinars and discussions around sort of that changing environment, but definitely the way that teams are measured has to fall in line with where your business is going from an operational perspective. I guess that's whatever model it comes up with, whether we're measuring or we're compensating people based upon, some other KPI or revenue. There's always been the question of measuring the kind of the impact that we know we're being asked to do to contribute to the successes of our overall teams versus our individual contribution. That's one thing I think why a lot of people, myself included, really like pre-sales. It's because you feel like you're joining a team that all wants to help each other for the most part. And this is not going to be true everywhere, but for the most part, that's kind of how we operate as a community. And certainly as someone leading a pre-sales team, I would want to encourage my team to do that. How do we make sure that the measurements that we set up don't almost gamify out that cooperation between teams? Neil, would love to hear kind of your perspective first on this, and then Ben. Neil, why don't I hand it off to Ben so he can get started on that if you need to try and fix your internet?
Yeah, I think that collaboration is paramount for SEs because, again, as a business leader, the worst thing that I could have happen is such a large disparity between my top performer and my lower performer that certain regions, certain AEs, however I've divvied up everything, are doing better just because there's no incentive for knowledge sharing, right? And SEs are this sponge of knowledge on getting feedback from the market, feedback from their post-sales team, feedback from their product team. And so there's not serious incentives in place for the whole team to get better. You're putting your whole business at risk, let alone the ability to make lower performers perform better, higher, et cetera, et cetera. So I know there's some conjecture in the chat on it. I still think it's a very admirable approach to think about when one wins, the whole team wins. And I think what that comes with, to counter Hans, your point on sort of the communist nature behind that, is as a leader and a manager, you just have to be comfortable cutting low performers. And so if you're a team where cream rises to the top, everyone's incentivized for everyone to win, and you're not afraid to let go of people that aren't pulling their weight, then I think the entire team feels incredibly motivated to keep getting better. But you go back to the first point I made, where what makes an SE team hard to measure is the nature of the function, being cross-functional, interdisciplinary. That means that you are a team that has to collaborate and continue to get better, and you need to incentivize that type of culture. I mean, how shameful would it be if one SE learned the best way to demonstrate a product, but didn't want to share that with their team because they wanted to be number one and get the biggest bonus? Well, that's hurting your overall team's ability and your overall company's ability to grow. So there's no good reason, I don't see a good reason, rather, to incentivize, top of the class performance and bonuses versus everyone winning performance bonuses.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I appreciate the further clarification on that. Neil, are you back?
Yeah, I would like to think so. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, no, I got most of what Ben said, and I think I really agree with that, especially the point of, how shameful would it be if, let's say, your top SE is not able to democratize or, let's say, share that knowledge of how they conduct their best demos with the team. So whilst I think it's important to incentivize or comp SEs in a more individualistic way, how do you ensure that this is not gamified? And which is why I think it's very important to have some sort of team targets, whether it's board, regional, however teams are structured, to ensure the collective success of the entire SE function, which obviously then moves the needle in terms of revenue. So I think that's probably the best way to ensure that these specific metrics are not being gamified, ensuring when one wins, everyone wins.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. A lot of good notes in the chat as well. I'm seeing so many different kind of models that people have gone with. Some like regional goals where they're more focused on maybe regional teams. This would be for bigger, larger organizations who have the ability to do that. Some who focus more. I've even seen some here where there's a split between what's based upon a KPI and some versus sort of a manager incentive which is actually a model that I'm very familiar with. Would love to get your thoughts sort of on that type of model where what we're measuring is both the overall performance. That could be through a technical win, it could be through some internal measurement, or it could be through a revenue goal. But then having the discretion of a director or a manager to split up another pool of bonuses based upon that team collaboration. Have you either of you seen either of these work, and what are your thoughts as leaders on that type of a model? Neil, if you're still with us, you're able to hear. I would love to hear your thoughts on that type of a model first.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I've heard a few SE leaders, and I've spoken to a few SE leaders about, let's say, a model that measures more individual metrics. For example, how many SEs, could be number of POCs, obviously, number of opportunities. I've also seen folks measure NPS, right? Post each demo, you send out a survey, which measures more, I would say, how individual SEs are functioning and how they're doing their job. But at a more team or managerial level, I've seen things like, let's say, an AE to SE ratio, for example, right? How stretched is that ratio? How thin are your SE spread, as an example? I've also seen things like, and I think Ben alluded to this before, but pre-sale team utilization. How much time do your pre-sales reps have to focus on things that actually move the needle rather than being bogged down by more manual, repetitive tasks? So I think it's an important blend of how you measure, let's say, the individual aspects I've been speaking about, and at a more holistic level, how is your entire team functioning to move the needle in terms of revenue?
Yeah. Yeah, I actually love the blended approach that we saw in the chat here, where I think everyone, I actually am a believer, and this works better at smaller companies than large companies, that everyone in the company should get some variable comp when revenue goals are met. If you're a sales-driven organization, right? I mean, it doesn't work if you're a research company, but if you're a sales-driven organization, if you exist to sell something into the market, I think it's encouraging for engineers to feel like, you know what, maybe if I ship this feature, we'll hit our number, and so on and so forth. So I believe everyone in the company should understand revenue targets and should make some money on that. I believe team-specific comp should be structured in a way that's collaborative. And I 1,000% agree that leaders should give wins for people who go above and beyond the call of duty. And it's not the most popular opinion, but I believe that should be done with high visibility, incredibly publicly, and in a way where everyone in the company knows Jack is getting a weekend vacation paid, or $5,000 to Uber Eats, or 10,000 options in the company, or a $5,000 cash bonus because everyone said and we saw that he's the reason why we hit our number this quarter, this year, whatever it is. And I think that sort of publicity, many companies find uncomfortable. I think it drives a good culture of motivation. And I think when done right is the best way to keep everyone with their eye on the ball. Everyone in the company gets some comp when you hit your sales numbers. SC teams get a bonus on top of that when every number is met. And specific individuals, when really going above and beyond, are given a bonus even on top of all that.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're seeing a lot of people kind of agreeing with you on this. I think I've seen a lot of that as well, which is the more that you can incentivize people to pay attention to what the company cares about, the more you're going to get people a little bit less infighting throughout the organization once people know, oh, hey, well, look, listen, what's the goal we're all shooting for here, right? And that's the whole point behind any type of measurement. People will behave to what they're measured to and comped against as well.
100%. I mean, clarity, to your point, clarity on even like one singular metric, one singular goal helps align every team in the company. The more fugazi craziness on like, you get paid this if that happens, but not if this person's involved. And if it's not in the CRM, you get a slap on like, the more of that, the harder for someone to understand what's going to earn them more money every day when they go to work, the less successful you're going to be as a team.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. I'd love to make a slight pivot because I think this is something that tends to come up in our conversations. Usually leads to pretty good kind of discussion as well. Let's talk about not kind of pre-sales focusing on sales opportunities, but let's talk about the other. It all eventually leads to sales, but pre-sales impact throughout the rest of the organization, whether that be supporting marketing teams with their initiatives, partner organizations, post-sales, customer success. Um, how do you measure and prove value and keep teams motivated to work on things like supporting a partner organization where they might not see any direct personal benefit? How do you keep those teams motivated, and how do you measure that? How do you measure that impact? Neil or Ben, yeah, either one of you.
How do I measure the impact of pre-sales teams on other functions or of other functions on pre-sales?
Pre-sales teams and other functions. So if the pre-sales team is assisting with running demos for a partner organization, or they're building out video content for the marketing teams to use, how do you measure that, and how do you keep teams motivated to do that?
Yeah, so I mean, look, my experience has been with OKRs, stands for objectives and key results. It's one of many management-y acronyms that effectively say, let's give people a big, hairy, audacious goal, a way to measure it, and then comp them behind it. So my experience has been sometimes a pre-sales objective, and I change them on a quarterly basis, aligned with annual goals for the company. And sometimes the quarterly goal has been, hey, our marketing team has no content on video demos and client stories. You, pre-sales leader, are the best fit person in the company to do that. If you can get 100% of our product taped and turned into videos for our marketing team, you'll meet your goal and you'll get your bonus. So some of it is just deciding. Sometimes some of the objectives that a pre-sales team has, because they have all the knowledge across the company, just isn't tied directly to revenue. I'm very keen on pre-sales teams being involved in churn rate conversations, because I do believe a pre-sales team is your best chance to have your highest renewal rates. And I also think pre-sales teams are incredibly valuable with the product team. And one of the things that we look at is how much of the information gathered in a sales conversation is translated into product roadmap deliverables. And you can measure that based on teams' communications, based on product roadmap that's attributed to things heard in sales conversations. I think you can structure a team in a way where, if you lean into the fact that SE should be cross-functional, and you just think about, as a business owner, what that looks like from a goal standpoint, you can always find a way to measure it.
Neil, I'd love to hear your perspective on this as well, on kind of ensuring that we incentivize kind of this collaboration that we would like with pre-sales teams.
Yeah, and I agree with all of what Ben said, right? And we've been talking about how SEs are the glue between all these different functions. But how do you then incentivize them to go above and beyond? And like we've been talking about, contribute to moving the needle in terms of revenue. So the churn rate was a good point. How do you tie SEs or attach SEs to conversations around renewals, retention, even expansion? And I think SEs do a great job in keeping, let's say, customer expectations realistic, validating, and obviously not over-promising things sometimes like an AE would do. And how do you essentially then tie these conversations back into some measurable format, right? How many, for example, how many upsell or cross-sell opportunities are SEs associated with, or what renewal opportunities are SEs associated with, as an example. Product was a great example as well. Their SEs are the ones who are obviously talking to clients, understanding feedback, gaps, product features, etc. So how do you then incentivize them to pass this feedback on in a timely manner, articulate it well, and then understand what percentage of these features that are being rolled out, right? And I've seen this in one organization I was speaking to recently, in terms of these features that we're rolling out, what is the adoption rate? How quickly is it being adopted, as an example? And that's something SEs were comped on, a small bonus pool for that. So essentially, just having systems in place to tie SE activities across different functions, whether that's customer success, whether that's passing feedback on to product, whether that's assisting with lead qualification and some marketing efforts, measure that, and then incentivize them accordingly.
Absolutely. And yeah, you can find Ben and Neil both on LinkedIn. If you don't mind dropping your links there in the chat for everybody. We also have our next partner forum is going to be coming up in June, on June 25th, all about disrupting traditional technical evaluations. Will also be a really hopefully good conversation with a couple more Presales Collective partners. And the link, Courtney just did drop that in the chat, so go ahead and click on that to register now so you don't miss it. And then thank you, Neil. Thank you, Ben, for being here. Really enjoyed our discussion and conversation, and we'll see everyone in the next partner forum.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jack and Courtney.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Thank you.